Hello, welcome to this episode of Let's Talk Death. I'm Fran Solomon.
And I'm Andy McNeil.
And we're thrilled to be your host for these conversations. Let's Talk Death is brought to you by Heal Grief, a social support network creating community after someone has died. Everything we do is inspired by our core belief that no one should ever grieve alone.
Our goal with this program is to have a friendly chat with some amazing people so we can help normalize and educate our Heal Grief community. Our guest today is Dr. Kathy Shear. Dr. Kathy Shear is an internist and a psychiatrist, really with a heart of a social worker. She is the founder and director of the Center for Complicated Grief. Dr. Shear has been studying and treating people with complicated grief for more than 30 years. She developed a short-term therapy, complicated grief, CGT, that was influenced by her inherent optimism and faith in human creativity and resilience. She is a force to be reckoned with as a clear and creative thinker. Dr. Shear engages deeply in research, teaching, and writing. She finds it deeply gratifying that CGT has helped so many people rediscover enthusiasm for life while finding a way to accept and honor their loss. Dr. Shear, welcome to Let's Talk Death. We are honored to have you with us.
Thank you so much, Andy and Fran, and I'm honored to be here. So thanks.
Dr. Shear, you developed complicated grief therapy as a short-term therapy that helps grieving individuals to accept and honor their person. I wonder if you could share with us how grieving people became the focus of your work, and could you share the story behind developing complicated grief therapy as short-term therapy to help them?
Sure. So it was serendipitous, Fran. I mean, I was doing anxiety disorder research at the University of Pittsburgh, and a colleague, Holly Priggerson, who is now herself a pretty well-known figure in this field, came and knocked on my door. And what was happening is that she had been interested in the topic of grief, and had kind of uncovered this problem of sorts of people who were experiencing prolonged grief. And she was working with our late life depression group in Pittsburgh, and the depression treatments were not really working to help the grief. And so she thought, well, there is some element of anxiety, so maybe Kathy can help. And so she came and knocked on my door, and that's how it all got started. And what was the other question? How did we develop the treatment?
Yes.
Keep going.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So I said yes because I say yes to a lot of things. I still do. But then I had to try to do something, which was a little bit terrifying, because I realized very quickly that I knew basically nothing about grief. I had been, I'd been trained in a very good psychiatric training place, and really learned a lot about psychotherapy. I mean, it was really a psychotherapy training, and I knew that loss was important. I had learned that loss was very important, but I don't think anybody ever told me that grief was a thing, and so I went out to the hospice social workers in the Pittsburgh community. That was the first thing. I did two things right away out of my own anxiety. One was to connect with these guys, and they were enormously helpful. But actually what I remember is after the first meeting with one of the major hospice groups I think it was Forbes Hospice in Pittsburgh, the person in charge of it, I met with two people, and they told me to go away and not come back for 6 months or so, because I had a lot of work to do to understand what I was talking about. So I did that. And the second thing I did was I started reading like crazy. And I read two literatures. One was the mid to late it was the mid 1990s that I'm talking about right now. And so there was a beginning grief research literature and bereavement research literature. So I started reading that. And then I did three things. I did that. I started reading more in the attachment literature, because I figured, if you want to understand the response to something, which is what we know grief is, the response to loss,
Sure.
then you have to understand what loss is. And the third thing I did was I started supervising some clients that were being seen already. So, I mean, and just doing that using all the psychotherapy skills that I had developed by that time. So that's how it all started, and then, kind of grew from there.
So I have a question. How do you define, or at what point do you assess that someone has what you call complicated grief?
Yeah, that's a great question. and actually, it's a lot easier than it was a year ago or even 6 months ago, because first of all, there is a diagnosis now in the International Classification of Diseases from the World Health Organization, the ICD-11, and it's called prolonged grief disorder, which is what, so Holly continued to do work in sort of defining this syndrome, whereas we did the work in developing an intervention. And she eventually changed the name of what she called this prolonged grief disorder. And it's really very simple. It is exactly what it sounds like. They define this as a form of pervasive grief, persistent pervasive grief, characterized by persistent, intense yearning, longing, or preoccupation with the person who died, and other evidence of ongoing emotional distress, emotional pain that is that altogether interferes with functioning, and also is persisting longer than the person themselves and or their social or cultural group thinks it ought to. And that has to be at least, according to the ICD, it has to be at least 6 months. But that doesn't mean, so there are lots of vagaries in this, and I think they're appropriate, because really how you define what we're calling prolonged grief disorder has a lot to do with how the person who's experiencing it is defining it, and it varies. The time frame isn't fixed, and we know that grief is never fully resolved. So, I mean, loss is after death is for a lifetime, and so is grief. So, and it can get very strong, years and years later in various circumstances. So,
well, grief is such an individual thing, and we all know that. But there are similarities certainly between how people grieve. One of the interesting things I found just for myself over the years working with bereaved people is there's lots of language we can use around it. But what becomes very important is what opportunities do we provide for people to work through, to self-examine, to, all the things that we know can be important for people to find ways to continue living their life, finding meaning in life, even beyond their grief, even though grief might still be a part of their life. So I'm curious about just complicated grief therapy and some of the practices that you might use, some of the things that are important pieces and elements in that. Because for me, there's lots of debate all over our field about language and what we call this and what we call that. At the end of the day, what I care about, and I know what all of us sitting here care about, is that people who are grieving get the help and the support that they need based on whatever it is they're facing, right? And so I'm curious about some of the pieces and parts to complicated grief therapy and how those apply to people's lives and obviously the change that we see in people who have an opportunity to be supported in that way.
Sure. So Andy, I think that's such a great question. And so to tell you about that, I want to just say that the way that we approach grief is that it is absolutely unique to each person, not even each person, but each relationship. Mm-hmm. And the situation that the person dies in and the context around it and the consequences of the loss. So it's very, very unique. But like you said, there are commonalities, and the commonalities, I like to think of them as the ones that we see at 30,000 feet, or the big picture, looking at the big picture. So when you look at the big picture, what you see is that most of the time people experience pretty intense emotions and a lot of preoccupying thoughts and such in the beginning. We call that acute grief. And then we also thinking this is evidence-based. We won't have time to get into it today, but this model is evidence-informed, let's say. I mean, it all grows out of a whole lot of science, psychology and neurobiology and such. But there's a lot of evidence that the humans are naturally predisposed to do two things. One is to adapt to any really change in our environment. We have to do that. Any living thing does. And the other is, as humans, we're pretty good at second guessing, and that's not a bad thing all the time, but in certain circumstances, it can kind of like grab you by the heels. And second guessing and also simulating all kinds of various scenarios in any situation. And we do that very naturally when something that we don't like happens. We try to reimagine it in a better way. And that's all very natural. But the basic thing that we do when we adapt is to a loss. The basic things we have to do, they're just two simple things, and they kind of devolve into other things, and that relates to the the therapy we do. But the two basic things are to accept the reality, which on the face of it, what choice do you have? But we don't necessarily do that so easily, and we can't really accept the loss of someone close in, sitting in a chair just saying, okay, I accept it. You can't, that's not the way it works. I mean, you have to live it. You have to really get into it. And so you have to do that. And then you also have to find a way to restore a sense of well-being. And for many people, that does involve things like meaning making. That's finding some sort of sense of purpose and meaning in your life. But not everybody does that, but many people do, and it can be helpful and important. You certainly do need to make some kind of sense out of what happened. You have to have a narrative, so to speak, of what happened, of how the person died or why the person died, or why, even if the why is I'll never know why. But so the therapy that we devised has two main objectives. One is to help people accept the loss and restore their sense of well-being, being able to see a future with some promise in, at least the possibility of a promising future and future happiness. And so that's the first goal. And the second goal is to help them identify and resolve those kinds of second guessing and sort of alternative scenario kinds of thinking, and ways of sort of not the things that we call them derailers, actually, things that derail the process of adapting. And we do this using a kind of planned 16 sessions is the length of this intervention, and it's sequenced to, first of all, help people accept their grief, first of all, because people a lot of times would think they're grieving too much, or they're grieving too little, or they don't like their grief, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And we want them to accept the grief and manage the emotional pain. Then we want to help them start to see even just a glimmer of hope for the future, some kind of promise in the future. We want to help them strengthen their relationships with people in their lives now. Then we want to help them tell the story of the death, live with reminders, and feel a meaningful sense of connection with their memories of the person who died. So
Yeah.
that's what the treatment looks like. And each one of those sort of objectives or aims that I mentioned has a specific procedure associated with it. And so,
Right.
we work through. But I want to say one other thing, Andy, which a lot of people don't, who know something about this approach, don't appreciate, and that is that the single most important thing we do is listen. So really, I mean, there's nothing more important to anyone actually than feeling heard, but it's especially true when we're grieving. We need to be heard. And so that is really at the center of what we do with CGT, as well as I think any other grief therapy, right?
Yeah, well, in a lot of ways, like you said, if you don't feel heard, all of the other things that we're talking about, it happens without, in some ways, the foundation that makes that a special setting
Right.
for that transformation to happen, right?
Yeah.
If people don't feel heard, yeah, definitely. So we actually only have a few minutes left.
Of course.
Time just flies by when we're all chatting. But we do want to make sure that our listeners have an opportunity to know how they can connect with you, Kathy, and with Center for Complicated Grief. If someone wanted to make that connection, how would they go about doing that?
Well, it's really pretty simple, Andy. We have, especially since everyone's on the internet these days, but it's just www.complicatedgrief, all one word, .columbia.edu. That's it. So we're at Columbia University School of Social Work. That's where we reside, and we have all kinds of information on our website. We do ongoing all kinds of webinars and workshops, and we have a very active kind of outreach program. And we do also help people find help when they're looking for it. So we do that as well.
Well, I did want to mention during these times, I think you recently did one for ADEC as well, a conversation about COVID-19 and some of the things that are, impacting us there as well. So
right.
We appreciate it.
Yeah, and how difficult it is to, we talk about how grief is isolating, and during these times of self-isolation, how much more difficult it is for one to journey with their grief.
Absolutely, Fran. Absolutely.
Well, Dr. Shear, we want to thank you for being our guest here at Let's Talk Death and sharing your journey and the story behind your work.
Thank you so much, Fran and Andy.
Definitely. Thank you. And we also want to thank those who are joining us for this episode. If you would like to learn more about Heal Grief, please visit us at healgrief.org. At healgrief.org, you can learn more about all of our programs and resources at Heal Grief, including our national network of support of grieving young adults called Actively Moving Forward.
Make sure to sign up on Heal Grief to receive our newsletter for links to future episodes of Let's Talk Death.
And with that, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Let's Talk Death.